Um, Welcome this afternoon. This is the February Planning Lunches at Noon monthly webinar series, and this will be our housing update. As advertised, we talked about, there's going to be talk about the New Hampshire's housing supply report, which I'll be doing, and Jodie Nazaka from the Manchester Economic Development Department will be talking about their experience in the city of Manchester with increasing the housing supply. We also are happy to have two people from our department's Invest NH program, Justin Rosemilio and Leanne Moynihan, who will be going first, just to talk about some of the, so that people can learn more about this program, which is heavily involved in helping increase the housing supply in the state. So let's just go right ahead here. What we're going to do with questions are, please, if you have any, click on the chat button on the ribbon at the top of your window. There's some other various controls that we have here in our Teams meeting that you can see there. And we will do our best to get to your questions at the end of the webinar. So with those housekeeping things out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and Justin, you can take over.
Hello, everybody. Ken, thank you very much. And thank you for the invite today to give us overview of the Invest in H program, what it did, and introducing a new version of the program. So Invest in H was created out of ARPA money that came into the state. It was $100 million that came in to work on the state's housing crisis that we have, to try to increase units and the availability of those units. And there were 5 programs that came out of that. 4 of them which were administered with within BEA, and 1 with some of our partners at New Hampshire Housing and Plan New Hampshire. Our capital grant program was a $50 million program. And that program there helped us make 26 awards and bringing on to availability 1,344 units. Of those, 845 are considered affordable under the guidelines of meeting a minimum of 80% of the area mean income. Another program attached to that Invest in H program was the municipal per unit program, and that was created to help with the permitting, to kind of encourage towns to permit more affordable for the workforce housing. And with that, ultimately we awarded out $16,220,000 over 43 awards, bringing in or potential to bring in 1,910 units, of which 1,623 of those units meet the affordability guidelines. Another program within this program here that was established was the demolition grant program, allowing municipalities to apply for these funds to work on demolition projects they might not have been able to afford to work on within their community to increase the housing supply or other blighted conditions in their town, with the ultimate goal of increasing housing. With that, we had 72 awards for $11,900,000. And this program here also will bring housing units online, estimated 2,302 units, of which 920 of those will meet our affordability guidelines. This next program, these next 2 programs here, were conducted with our partners at New Hampshire Housing, and one is the capital subsidy program, and $14 million was allocated for that program to assist with projects to move forward under their guidance. Also, their municipal planning and zoning grant, or better known as the HOP program, that was established to allow municipalities to receive funding so they can work on their zoning and planning regulations. Our new program that will be coming out in the Invest in H program is the Invest in H program. This is a $10 million program to, again, work on increasing the supply of affordable rental in the state of New Hampshire, in municipalities and private and not-for-profit housing developers are eligible to apply. BEA will be administering this program. And some of the things that to keep in mind for the requirements for this program, in the project, at least 20% of the units must meet the affordability guidelines. They must be restricted for a minimum of 10 years, and also have affordability guidance of 80% of the area mean income and below. These funds can be used for redevelopment costs, site development, site acquisition, code improvements, and other hard costs associated with development of the project. And with that, we have the Housing Champions program, and I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Leanne Monahan.
Hi, everyone. I am here for Housing Champion. Whoops. I think, right. Back. Okay, so the Housing Champion program is a new program. We have 18 communities that became housing champions in the first round of designation. We were pretty excited about that. That was when we first came out, and those 18 communities are pretty diverse. There were about half cities and half municipalities, and they reached almost all of the counties in New Hampshire. So we were excited about that. Those municipalities now are eligible for our grant programs, which are two. We have, the next slide will show, we have $1.5 million that has been put towards housing production, which is similar to the per unit grant program that Invest in H just finished. And that awards $10,000 per unit of affordable housing that received a certificate of occupancy in the previous state fiscal year. So that's important to remember. So the units that would qualify for the housing production grant to receive $10,000 per unit would have to be completed and received a CO for this year prior to June 30th of 2024. Next year, it'll be the same. It'll be 2025 as of June 2025. The second amount is $350 million, and that's for infrastructure grants. Those two applications are now online and available, but again, only available to our housing champion municipalities. The deadline for those applications is March 1st. Now, those 18 housing champions are also champions for 3 years. We are going to reopen the housing champion designation application April 1st. That was to allow communities to do any zoning changes they needed to make at the March meeting if they were a community that needed to go through town meeting. Cities don't have that time. I don't have to wait to March, but smaller communities do. So after the March meeting, if they change their zoning and now will qualify, they can apply April 1st. I believe I'm going to put the deadline for that early May, so that if we do have funds left over From the first round of grant applications for the housing production and infrastructure, we will reopen those, and those new housing champion municipalities will be eligible to apply for those in this year. If there are no funds left over, then we will wait till the following year. But again, even those municipalities that become housing champions in April, May, it is a 3-year designation, and going forward, they'll be able to apply for these funds, depending on what funding we get in the upcoming years. So the contact information, there is guidance on our website. The links are there, as well as contacting me directly for any help or questions.
Excellent.
And with that, I'm ready to hand it off, I guess,
Okay,
to
I'll hit.
Joe, to you, Ken.
Yep, I think I just got it. So thank you very much, Justin and Leanne. This is really great to have you all on this webinar and share what's going on with InvestNH. It's a very important program. So thanks again. Again, if you have any questions, go ahead and continue to place them in the chat. We'll answer them as best as we can. So let's, in the interest of time, let's continue on to the next section of this webinar. This is going to be the report on our most recent housing supply based on what we picked up over the past year. So let's see. So for our housing report, I'm going to start with some background, where we're coming from with doing this report. You may be familiar with this if you've been to one of our previous webinars about this in previous years. But if in case you haven't, this housing report that we do is a byproduct of our office's mandate to do annual population estimates of every municipality in the state. In order to produce these estimates, we rely on 2 inputs for our data. We count the people living in group quarters, such as nursing homes or college housing or prisons. And then we also obviously estimate the number of people living in households. And that's the component that we're talking about now that results in this housing report. To get that number of households, we conduct an annual survey of every single municipality. They report to us the change in the number of dwelling units in their communities. We are then able to apply some factors such as persons per housing unit and percent of units which are occupied year-round to produce our population estimates. Because of our mandate to estimate every single municipality's population in the state, we do achieve 100% coverage with our survey every year. The downside of that is that it has an effect on the timeliness of our data. So you're going to see in this report that we are looking at data that was from building permits issued in 2023. This is what the survey looks like that we send out to every town and city in the state. Once again, notice that this is for calendar year 2023. And for our estimates, because we don't have a statewide system that records certificates of occupation, instead we assume a 6-month time frame for completion of permitted buildings, so that the numbers you see in the report that we're publishing here, that's now on our website, are estimates of the housing supply as of July 1st, 2024. Now, looking at the form, we originally summarized our data in 3 housing categories. There's single family, multifamily, and manufactured housing. But you'll see on the form, there's actually several groups that make up multifamily. So as of starting with our 2020 report, we split that multifamily group into finer categories so that we now list buildings with 2 housing units, and then the 3 or 4 units, and then 5 or more. We also have a line item for conversions of housing units. Generally, that has to do with, say, from single family to larger numbers, or former commercial buildings or something like that to residences. And so for reporting purposes, though, we group the conversions into the 2-family category. There are limitations to the way we do things with this dwelling unit survey. Remember that this survey was originally designed to support our annual population estimates, so the data collected focuses on the number of households per structure and not on other elements of a more comprehensive housing survey. So we don't gather assessed value, we don't gather physical attributes. We have had many questions about whether we split out ADUs. We have not developed that yet. We don't collect addresses, just the total numbers per municipality. Also, do remember that not all permitted units might be built. We have the ability to, towns have the ability to let us know if certain permits have expired, and they get subtracted from the housing supply in the following year. They're generally small numbers though. Okay, so here we go. This is what you wanted to see was the results. This is the graph showing the number of permits issued between 2002 and then 2023, which is the most recent year that we have data for. You'll see that there was a 14% decrease in the total units since 2022. We have opinions about what's going on with that, but we think that basically the general trend is going to continue upward. At this point, through calendar year 2023 permits, nearly 20,000 units have been added over that time since 2020. If we assume similar permitting in 2024, New Hampshire will have added 25,000 units as of this coming year, or which would be 75% of the target that was given in the New Hampshire Housing's statewide housing needs assessment. So here's how the numbers are breaking out based on our type of housing units. We saw a slight decrease in the number of single-family homes permitted in 2023, 211 fewer, and a larger decrease in the number of multi-family units permitted. There were 579 fewer of those. Most of that drop in the multifamily was in the large multi-unit structures, those 5+. There were 400 fewer of those. If I've also put the previous 2 years down there at the bottom, and you can see, however, that the percentage of multifamily continues to remain higher than in the past, and we don't see any reason for that to be changing going forward. Looking at the patterns of the permitting, we've been seeing a trend, and it continued in 2023, where we're continuing to see concentration of permitting into a smaller number of communities each year. What that means is, for instance, in 2023, there were only 11 communities in the state, and that's 28% of the population, but they permitted 50% of the total new housing units. For comparison, in 2022, it was 13 communities representing 34% of the population. So we're actually getting a smaller percentage of the population for the communities that are permitting half of the housing units in the state in a year. So I've listed the 9 communities in 2023 which permitted 100 or more units. I'll let you look at that at your leisure. There was a new entry. Epping had a year in 2023. They permitted 120 units. This slide illustrates what I was talking about with the concentration of new housing construction. It's a little not immediately apparent what's going on here, so let me just break it down. So the population figures in the state are the light green bars on the left of each pair, and the number of housing units permitted are the dark green bars on the right-hand side. So if you look, and then at the bottom of the graph, you'll see that you're seeing pairs based on the numbers of units permitted per community. So on the right, those 2 largest bars are the 9 communities in the state that permitted more than 100 units. And they accounted for 47% of units permitted statewide, but only were 26% of the state population. Then if you go over to the left-hand side of the graph, let's look at actually the 2 pairs on the left. So per communities that permitted 10 or fewer units, there were 139 of those. They were 24% of the state's population, but they only permitted 13% of the state's new housing units. We got some maps in our report. This one shows how many housing units were permitted within each municipality in the state. The darkest shades there, as normal, have the greatest number of new units. And we've also highlighted 13 cities in the state for comparison. You can see that while many of the communities permitting the most units were cities, there were also several towns in the mix, including Merrimack, Epping, Londonderry, Derry, Hudson, Pelham, and actually Newport. And then also on the map, and this is in our report, so you'll be able to see it, have a hard copy if you need. The map lists the 9 communities, which I mentioned earlier, which permitted more than 100 housing units. We can see differences in growth by county. Single-family housing tended to be represented more in Rockingham County, 574 new units, followed by Hillsborough, Grafton, and Carroll. Fairly similar to the previous year, except that Grafton came in this year, replacing Merrimack in the top 5 for, for the most multifamily units permitted, Hillsborough County by far permitted the most. And you'll have seen earlier, it was largely almost half of that, I think, more than half were in Manchester alone, followed by Rockingham, Stratford, and Grafton counties. And again, the pattern was fairly similar in previous years, except just depending on which towns in which counties had large projects coming in. We noted that there's only 2 counties in 23, Hillsborough and Stratford, which issued more multifamily permits than single family. There were 6 of those multifamily compared to single family the previous year. So dropping off of that for multifamily. There were 2 counties, Belknap and Hillsborough, which issued more permits overall for multifamily compared to their own previous year. And 3 counties, Coos, Grafton, and Rockingham, which issued more single family permits in their county than in previous year. And of course, I'm talking about municipalities issuing these permits within the counties. Here's another way of visualizing how that's going on with the pie charts, one on each map. The size of the pie has to do with the total number of housing units permitted, and you can see that Hillsborough had by far the most, and not only that, more than 3/4 of their housing units permitted were multifamily, versus say Rockingham right next to it, which had the second highest amount, but about 2/3 of theirs were single family. So you'll be able to look through all that with your copy of the report. At the municipal level, what we see from year to year, especially at the higher end of numbers being permitted, is it changes from town to town, year to year, based on where the large projects are. So for instance, for single family units, let me see here. I think, Laconia is the only one that's in the top 5 or 6 in both years. Otherwise, it's changed from town to town or city to city. Multifamily units also really depends on where the big projects are that actually happen to get permitted in a particular year. Manchester, for instance, with 666 units was not in that list the previous year. And we can calculate the greatest percentage increase in total housing stock. Some of these large percentage, of course, start with towns that have a smaller base. But Epping, for instance, with their 120 units, that's almost 3 3/4% in a single year being permitted. Lebanon likewise has over 3%. We do have Dunbarton in there. Dunbarton's a relatively small community, but their 28 new units was more than 2% of their existing housing stock. And then Portsmouth is up there as well, above 2%. This table shows how development is going by regional planning Commission. This is because in the New Hampshire Housing's report on the state housing supply, there was a forecast of the number of units that would be needed within each region by 2025 in order for the state to reach a balanced market by 2040. As of 2024, the total housing supply in the state, assuming the construction of all units permitted in 2023, is estimated to be 658,219 units, which is 19,868 more, 3.1%, than the number of housing units counted at the 2020 census. By comparison, the statewide housing needs assessment forecasted there would need to be 32,704 new housing units over that time by 2025. So we have we'll see how close we are to that goal by this time next year. We did produce detailed maps of the growth by municipality within each planning region. Here's a sample of that map that's in our report. All of those, maps 3 through 11, all 9 of those regions are going to be listed in there. So with all that data, some of the takeaways again, so the number of housing units in 2023 was down from 2022. It was equivalent almost to the number in 2021. So again, what we are seeing is that the state is still on track to have added about 25,000 units through this time next year. We've noted that there is this multi-year trend towards a smaller number of communities in the state, which are mainly the cities and the large towns, that are accounting for a majority of the housing units permitted in the state. Also, we noticed that 2023 ended a multi-year trend in which there were a greater and greater share each year of multifamily units. Looked like it hit at least a temporary peak in 2022. There's been a slight decrease now compared to the single family this past year. And just remember too that while the report assumes that all units permitted in 2023 were built as of July 1st of this past summer, it is actually difficult to know how many units permitted in 2023 have been completed or are under construction. Let's see. So those are the highlights of the report. I haven't been checking the chat while I've been reading. Are there any questions that I should try to answer right now before we go on, Noah? Or
yes, there's a couple of questions here right at the end. I have a question about which I know we get a lot, about if there's any way to estimate how many permitted units actually get built.
Right. Okay.
Since we know that there's kind of a building permit does not actually always lead to a certificate of occupancy in a completed unit.
Right. I think we probably have an undercount of the number of units that actually that do not get built. We have the opportunity on the form for towns to let us know about expired building permits, and many do take us up on that, but it's not consistent. So for the ones that do, it's a small number, not negligible, but it's a fairly small number, maybe 100 or so statewide. So I would say it's probably going to be more than that, but I can't say exactly how many more. But it is a sample that give us the number of expired permits rather than everybody. Actually, before we go, I'm going to actually continue with the last little bit of my presentation here. I do want to, this will be something that you can link to when you get the PowerPoint of this presentation, but I wanted to draw your attention to this particular resource for all communities who are looking to improve their housing availability. This one is the New Hampshire Housing Toolbox, which is provided by BEA in conjunction with the state regional planning commissions. I found this is a great place to turn to when you want to start researching how to produce more housing in your community. There's in-depth information in there on at least 20 different types of development, including links to case studies in them and suggestions on how to get started. So that's down there at nhhousingtoolbox.org. And that's what, okay, that was my last slide because we moved the Housing Champions one up earlier. And so again, I'll give a plug for the Invest in H program and the Housing Champions program, and see if you can get involved with those. I think what I want to do then is let's move on to the third presenter in our webinar, and then we'll come back and answer any questions in the time that we have remaining. So thank you all for your time. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Jodie Nazaka from the city of Manchester, who will be talking about how things are being done in Manchester to increase the housing supply. And I'll be advancing the slides for you. So.
All right. Good afternoon. Thank you. So thank you for this opportunity to present what the city of Manchester is doing to address the housing needs in the state and also our community. So as Ken mentioned, my name is Jodie Nazaka. I'm the Economic Development Director for the City of Manchester. And I want to preface that many of the initiatives that I will present this afternoon are a combination of many different departments in the City of Manchester working together in their areas of expertise. So that being said, some of the initiatives that I'll mention, I'm not well versed in, but I'll do my best to respond to any questions in those areas should they come up at the end. So next slide, please. So before we jump in, I think it's important that we kind of set the stage for why Manchester is in the position we're in. So for a quick background and overview, since some of the folks on this call this morning are from all over the state and may not be as familiar with Manchester as maybe I am or some other people on the call. So Manchester is the largest city north of Greater Boston. And yes, it is larger than Portland, Maine and Burlington, Vermont, but sometimes it doesn't feel as urban as maybe those communities are. Our median age is 37. We are one of the top 10 youngest communities in the state. I love sharing that information with folks because in New England, Northern New England especially, we are known as being old and cold. We did show signs of aging back a few years back. In 2019, our median age was 39, and thankfully we started trending back down. So 37 is a good age for us. Our median household income has started trending up, now at 78,000, whereas in 2023 it was 74,000 and 66,000 in 2022. Our unemployment rate is low, which is great, and 60% of New Hampshire's population lives within 30 miles of Manchester. In the past 3 years, roughly 1,123 residential units have been completed in Manchester. And by that, I mean certificate of occupancy in hand and ready to occupy. So this does not account for a lot of the numbers that Ken was just talking about for the numerous projects that are under construction or permitted. And Manchester has been named the hottest housing market by Realtor.com and Zillow a record 34 times. I think that number might be higher now since 2021, including their most recent ranking. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, Manchester has been designated the hottest housing market in the country and ranked one of the top places to live, which is good news because it means our city is a destination for families and businesses and we're thriving. Wearing my economic development director hat, this is great for our marketing. The headlines and news stories published on international headlines are making great press for our mid-sized New England city. But it also creates an upward pressure on our housing prices. And with less than a 1% vacancy rate, it presents challenges, especially in our affordability. And I'll give you an example. Just recently, I was looking at Realtor.com and I noticed there was a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house. It was a 1950s ranch home in the quiet North End neighborhood, Ward 2, if you're familiar with Manchester, near McIntyre Ski Area. In 2013, it sold for $175,000. It just sold for $610,000 after spending less than 2 months on the market, which is a great house, but that's just crazy to think about the difference in price. Next slide, please. So a healthy housing market is around 6%. Our vacancy rate is around 6%. So we're literally 1/100th of the housing that we need in our city. So while the city is thriving and our economy is growing, the demand on housing supply and needs could ultimately impact our growth. And while the graphic on the screen is showing the data for Manchester, I'm sure if you were to plug your community into the New Hampshire Housing Data Dashboard, the results wouldn't look much different. Because as a state, as we just heard, we're experiencing a massive housing shortage. Next slide, please. So, however, what I'd like to talk about this morning, this afternoon, I guess, is in light of all these challenges that we're seeing as a state and a lot of the data that Ken just presented to you all, in Manchester, we're seeing a lot of progress. And in 2024, we issued over 600 certificates of occupancy. 600 new dwelling units came online, and over 700 units are in active construction. And a couple of examples, there's many examples, but just here on the slides are a couple of examples shown on the screen of projects we're seeing around the city. The top left is the Brady Sullivan Sundial Ave project that will bring 160 market rate units to the South Elm area near Velcro Inc. Next to the top right is one of several offices to residential conversions in the downtown. And that's a recipient of 79E approval to convert an underutilized office space into 76 market rate units with 2 first-floor commercial spaces on Lowell Street. And a condition of that 79E approval was that they must accept a certain amount of housing vouchers in order to get a designated amount of years of tax relief. On the bottom right and left corners of the screen are photos of Lincoln Ave capital projects that are made up of 3 separate properties in the downtown area, and the 142 units restricted household earnings of less than 60% of the area median income. 36 of those units will receive project-based vouchers, with 30 of those units being set aside for veterans and their families. The project received funding from the state's Invest in H program that we heard about from Justin earlier, significant funding from the city's Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And lastly, in the middle picture, that yellow building, it's not going to stay yellow. The picture on that is Central Street, which will bring 77 luxury units to the downtown area with 1 unit of first floor commercial and limited lower level parking. And this, I chose all these examples because it demonstrates the vast variety of housing types that are being approved and supported in the city. And it shows that there's strong support of affordable units in the city, but housing of all kinds, because we're seeing all different needs in our city, and there's strong support from our elected officials, our stakeholders, and our community to see this type of housing in our city. And in the report from Ken, we saw that Manchester is approving a lot of multifamily. That's not because we don't want to see more single family, but as a relatively dense built out city, we just lack the land needed or required to build more single family housing. Next slide, please. So I mentioned the use of 79E to support housing conversions, which is a temporary property tax relief, for a defined period of time to incentivize development projects. So in Manchester, we're using this tax incentive to encourage private reinvestment in our downtown and redevelopment districts through the use of 79E. We approved 14 affordable housing units at the Lamont Hanley building on Elm Street, which is the building shown here on the slide. The rendering building will look like once it's done. Next picture. So the next picture should, if you hit, there we go. So another successful example of RSA 79E is the rehab of an underutilized building in our redevelopment district is the factory on Willow Street. So this adaptive reuse project involved the complete renovation and repositioned use of a mixed-use art community. The work was completed in 2021 with key elements of the original building being preserved and replicated. The 4th floor retains its original hardwood floors. The windows were completely replaced with historically accurate black framed windows. Most of the exterior and internal masonry was restored. The 4-story mill building is now features 60 studio apartments, commercial space, event space, generous outdoor areas, 16 Airbnb units, and most recently a gin and vodka distillery was added to the complex. Next slide, please. So for anyone on the call that's not familiar with the use of 79E program, it allows governing bodies to grant temporary property tax relief for a defined period of time. And it's intended to incentivize development projects that substantially rehabilitate a qualifying structure or replace a structure that doesn't pose any significant historical or cultural value to the community, provided that the project creates a certain public benefit, and that has to be decided on by the elected officials. So in Manchester, properties within our downtown, our central business service district, and our redevelopment district qualify for this relief incentive. And the program should be used as an incentive to play a critical role in the feasibility of the development project. So we made updates to our application a few years back that put the burden of proof on the applicant to demonstrate that without this incentive from the community, that the project's feasibility would be challenging. So it's not a handout. It's not if you apply, you absolutely get it. It's to incentivize the rehab a lot of our underutilized buildings in our city. And we've had such great success with it at boosting redevelopment in our downtown that we're in talks now about potentially pausing the approvals within the CBSD, and that's the area shown on red on the screen, and encouraging rehab projects only in the purple district, which is the redevelopment district. And that's the area where that factory on Willow Street was rehabbed. Next slide, please. So our priority goal for my office, as well as the whole city, is to incentivize and encourage housing in the city. And through incentives or initiatives like 79E, we're attracting housing developers and investors to Manchester, thereby enhancing total housing inventory and investments in our community. So as more homes become available, the supply of housing units grows and the vacancy rate will increase. So classic supply and demand, when housing supply matches demand, offer more consistent and fair rental rates. So we've approved 700 new residential units in the downtown over the last several years. All of those have been any approvals, but the incentive has played a significant role in the downtown's COVID recovery and rehabilitation. Next slide. And I just wanted to pop this slide in the presentation because it just shows how the skyline is changing in the city with the new 75 Canal project in the foreground and many of the other examples that I just talked about in the distance. And a lot of these examples that I talked about are within our downtown area. So it's adding a ton of foot traffic, a ton of vibrancy to our community. So it's really boosting the economy in our city. And a lot of this has to be, credit has to be given to the increase in biofabrication industry that we're seeing in our city. And it's bringing a lot of great momentum to our downtown as well as our entire city. Next slide, please. So another creative approach, a new simplified approach to filling a crisis level need to workforce and affordable housing in New Hampshire. The city will welcome its first 3D printed home this year and hopefully many more to come. The homes are made up of 3D printed sandstone concrete panels. Next picture should show that. There you are. So the company Madco 3D is working with the University of New Hampshire through John Roth, director of John Olson Advanced Manufacturing Center at UNH, where they're pre-printing the panels on campus. And I do believe there's a project in the works in Rochester as well. This simplified approach to home building could change the game when it comes to affordability. And we're thrilled that the city's building department made this a simple process to get a building permit approved. And hopefully we'll see this start to take shape as when the snow starts to melt a little and they can start constructing. But all permits are in place and they're ready to go as soon as the lot is ready. Manchester has also recently changed its accessory dwelling unit ordinance to allow larger ADUs, more locations in the city, and fewer parking requirements. We took an approach to try and make things a little bit easier for folks to get the ADUs approved on their lots. The changes are intended, like I said, to make things easier and to build more multifamily housing in the city. So the changes include ADUs can now be up to 900 square feet or the height of the main structure. ADUs can be built in more locations throughout the city, including within or above a garage. Number of required parking spaces per ADU has been reduced, and fewer are required in less locations, meaning that within the city, an ADU is by right. Next slide. And as a city, we got creative. This is actually one of my favorite slides to talk about. We got creative and the city sold 15 vacant city lots at public auction, generating $1.13 million for the city's Affordable Housing Trust Fund. The auction is part of the mayor's broader strategy to address affordable housing and homelessness in Manchester. And by selling surplus city-owned properties and reinvesting the proceeds into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, the city is taking a proactive approach to creating sustainable housing solutions and supporting the residents' needs. So the land sale initiative is a joint effort involving city departments, which included the tax collector, assessing, planning and community development, public works, and the solicitor's office. And the city identified 15 sites that are surplus to its needs. Of those 15 vacant lots, 12 were acquired by tax collector deed, with 100% of the net profits directed toward our affordable housing trust fund. And quick quote from the mayor, we're not just selling land, we're investing in our very fabric of our community, ensuring that every dollar spent today builds a bridge to a more equitable tomorrow. And that was a quote from the mayor's State of the City address a week or so ago. Slide, please. So similar to many of the folks probably on the call and what we heard about before earlier, is Manchester has been designated as a housing champion by the state of New Hampshire's Department of Business and Economic Affairs. And this qualifies us to apply for millions in grant funding to help advance innovative housing solutions and infrastructure projects in our city. And as a community, we are extremely eager to submit for the first round of funding for the Housing Infrastructure Municipal Grant Program. We're hoping to submit for that in support of a fire suppression system to support an affordable housing development project that without the fire suppression system would be nearly impossible for them to complete. As well as the Housing Production Municipal Grant to reinvest back into our Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So Leanne mentioned the background of what that grant includes, and in the time frame that they provided, the city is eligible. I'm not assuming we're going to get this much, but we have 48 units which are eligible because they are capped at 50% AMI or 30% AMI, which means that we are eligible for around $480,000 given the requirements of that grant. Again, knowing there's only $1.5 million, I can't imagine that City of Manchester would get all of that, but it's exciting to show that we are being extremely proactive in the City of Manchester of trying to meet the affordable housing crisis needs in the state and our city. We have also seen over $4 million in private recipient invest NH funds in the city. And those went to 3 projects total for a total of 92 units. 72 are affordable at the 80% AMI with utilities included for a cap of 5 years. And that goes back to what Justin was talking about at the beginning of the call. Next slide, please. And lastly, one of the biggest projects that the city is working on is we're also in the process of conducting our first comprehensive citywide zoning rewrite over 20 years, and the 4th one in the city's history. With tremendous public input, Manchester is committed to making the zoning more user and development friendly, as well as making certain that we reflect what our city wants both now as well as in the future. So a quick background on this. So in August of 2021, the Manchester Planning Board adopted our new master plan. And that was the first since 2009. The 2021 master plan is based on community input and describes the people of Manchester's goals for how the city should develop over the years to come. One of the major goals of that master plan was to do a complete zoning overhaul to make sure that what we said, that what the people of the city said they wanted to do, the zoning allows us to do. So to make those goals a reality, we had to redo the zoning ordinance. The code will assemble a new zoning ordinance, new subdivision regulations, new site plan regulations, all in one document, making them easy to use as possible. Amending these regulations will bring them more in line with what today's residents and businesses want from the city. Next slide. So it's probably hard to see on this map, but this image just shows the before and after of what the city zoning map could look like. The before on the right side, the draft after on the left-hand side. Next slide has a zoomed in version of that. So you can just see here a quick example of how the attempt is to kind of clean things up. You can see on the right-hand side how the zoning districts are a little choppy, a little all over the place. The to clean that up a little, make the districts a little bit more easier to understand and less broken up. Next slide. And quickly, I'll just go through the goals of this rewrite. So goal number 1 is to enact the vision of the 2021 master plan, as I mentioned, with a focus on form and character, emphasize quality construction, increase densities, encourage mixed uses, revise the zoning map, and help reduce housing cost. Next slide. Goal number 2 is to take the middle ground, and we discussed how we can achieve our goals, and we think that's through a revisit of the single family zoning, and discussions came up with public input about going as far as even eliminating single family zoning. That's not the direction that this code is going to go, but those were how discussions came up, is how do we make this a more approachable zoning ordinance? And part of that is looking at the single family zoning and how does a city like Manchester become more development friendly. And goal number 3 is address issues with the current zoning ordinance, such as split zoned parcels, our poor quality maps, legal compliance, such as our sign regulations and variance standards, legal opportunities, such as junkyards, and just catch up to current land use needs. Next slide. And goal number 4 and 5 might be the most important, and that is accessibility. The zoning laws should be understandable, using illustrations, clear language, and instructions. And lastly, creating an ordinance that the people of Manchester want. So this has been a huge undertaking. This is all thanks to Director Jeff Gallager and the Planning and Community Development Department and his staff. They have been working on this for what seems like years now. It's probably been 2 years. They've gone through every ward multiple times, held one-on-one meetings with residents, with extremely accessible. It's been a great process, continuing to work through it. It's now released to the public for public comment, and I assume in the next few months, later this year, it will go forward to the alderman for review. And with that, next slide. I assume there's many questions on the call for all of us on the call, so happy to take any questions. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes. I guess let me ask Noah, do we have any questions in the chat that we have time to answer? Looks like we have a little bit of time.
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to a question from earlier. It was about the, let me just find it again. Was about if there's a healthy ratio of single family homes to the multifamily dwelling units. Say there's no right number that I could say this is the number that should be the right number in every town, in every municipality. I think a lot of it's going to depend on your community does a kind of municipal housing needs assessment and makes that determination based on where the need is and what type of infrastructure they may have. But I did want to say that as a plug to help answer that question, our office, OPD, we're in the final stretch right now of putting together this tool, which is going to allow for the calculation of different fiscal impacts for different housing types, including both single family and multifamily, and every municipality in the state. And this will help to kind of get at the answer. I think probably help to get at some of this answer to this question of what is the healthy ratio of single family homes to multifamily dwellings.
Thank you for the question and for the answer to the question.
Let's see. Trying to see if there's any. I'm not seeing any questions yet specific to Jodie's presentation. So folks, again, if you have questions, feel free to write them in the chat box. I do see a hand up from the initials ME. Unfortunately, we're not going to unmute people to have them actually ask a question. So just due to the number of people on the webinar, but feel free to put that question in the chat.
While people are, and if there are any other questions, I've put up the contact info and links for the subjects that we covered today. So there's links to the New Hampshire State Data Center, which is where we do the housing supply reports and the population estimates. There's a link there to the report that just came out, the 2024 update based on the 2023 dwelling unit survey. It includes the source data as well as all the maps. There's my contact information up there. For InvestNH, I gave the contact for the director, Andrew Dorsett, who unfortunately wasn't able to join us today. And there's also a link to the InvestNH program itself, which I believe, as there were earlier in the presentation, links to the Housing Champion program as well. And then also Jodie Nazaka's contact info as well. Let's see.
Yeah, I can go through a couple others. Again, there was a comment with the request for promotional materials about Housing Champions when the next round opens. So, Lan, I don't know if you're still here, if you want to throw that one back to you, or folks should just be on the lookout for additional information on the Housing Champions page.
I did, thanks, Noah. I did put a link to the Housing Champion Designation slide presentation, which will be the same for the next round. The requirements are exactly the same. And as I mentioned earlier, the next round will open up April 1st, and there'll be more information going out before it is released. But we're waiting for towns to go through their town meeting process so that they can put their applications together following that. Again, any questions, you can always contact me or send me an email. What do
Great.
you think?
And then there was a bunch of long comments, which we're not going to be able to address. I will say there was a comment / question about assessed values going down with more multifamily. Again, I'm going to defer to the fiscal impact of housing study, which has some information on, it's going to have some information basically that incorporates kind of assessed values and the fiscal impact when that comes out and shows that there actually is some kind of efficiency and greater assessed value for multifamily. I'll also point, if Sarah is still here, maybe she can put in the chat the link to the analysis of assessed value per acre work that New Hampshire Housing did a couple of years ago for different housing types with Urban 3. So, and understood that those results are not going to be true everywhere.
Okay.
I think those are the last questions I'm seeing right now.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, then, thank you, Noah, and thank you to our presenters, and especially thank you all for coming to our monthly plan webinar. There's some links as well on this last slide to find out what will be coming up this time next month. And also, if you're up to it, please fill out a short anonymous online feedback survey. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.